In CSS, you can style pseudo classes, which are those things for hover and active states where you can take a selector like label and then put colon after it, and then something like hover, and then you can write your styles for a label that's being hovered over. The syntax for doing this is slightly different in Imba, and it actually goes way beyond what you can do with regular CSS. In Imba, instead of pseudo classes, we call these modifiers, and it's a really powerful system. So let me show you how it works. In its most basic form, it's just like a CSS pseudo class, except you use an @ symbol instead of a colon. So the syntax is label @hover. And then I could put something like BGC red 5 here, and we'll just see that it works. So if you want to follow a very CSS-like way of doing this, you can do it just like in CSS. Remember that it's an @ symbol instead of a colon, and this works with all the regular CSS pseudo classes like hover and active and whatever else. But there's actually 3 ways to write this modifier. You can do it on the selector like we have here, but another way to do it is on the property name. So I can write BGC @hover colon, and I'll actually do cooler 3 here just to make it look more subtle. But check it out, the hover state is now part of the property name. And we can see that that works in the browser, and they don't have to be super disconnected. And there's even a way to connect these even closer together. The third way to write these modifiers is immediately following a value. So BGC cooler 2, immediately followed by @hover colon cooler 3. So that's another way to write it. And you can follow that with yet another one for active, cooler 4, I'll do in this case. And this is great because when you write out a property like this, you're usually thinking about, well, how should it look when it's hovered? And you can just write that immediately right here without having to create a new selector. And this could all work in an inline style. You can't write these pseudo classes within inline styles using regular CSS, but with Imba's modifiers you can. Now where this gets really powerful is that Imba has modifiers that aren't part of the CSS pseudo class system. Imba has its own custom modifiers that let you do all kinds of cool things. So I'll show you an example up here on body. We have BGC cool1. There's a modifier called landscape that I could use to say BGC @landscape colon, I'll do red 5 to make it very obvious. And check this out. This is actually going to create a media query for if the browser is in a landscape orientation, meaning it's in a wider shape. So when I resize the browser to be wider, it turns red. There's even a dark modifier. So I could say BGC @dark, and maybe I'll choose, black as the background there. This is for if the user has set the preference for a dark color scheme on their operating system, they would now have a black background. And actually, if you have that set on your computer, you should see that as a black background now. Okay, so these create media queries behind the scenes, but they're effortless to use. They feel just like pseudo classes, but they're even easier than pseudo classes because you can use them right in line, and you could even use these in inline styles. There's also breakpoint modifiers, which allow you to set up responsive designs very easily. Let's try one of those. I'll do BGC @XS, XS for extra small, and I'll just do the same thing with a red background so we can see it. And what this does is it's saying I have an extra small breakpoint, and as I resize, we can see the browser turns red right around this point. So XS is a preset breakpoint, and there's different ones for XS, SM for small, medium, large, extra large. But you could actually use your own custom value here. So if you wanted the breakpoint to be at 300, you can just type the number 300. So @300 creates a breakpoint at 300 pixels wide. And if you want the opposite, you can do exclamation point. Now it's gray when the browser is above 300 and red when it's below 300. You can also flip the SM, XS ones by using LT-XS. So that'll make it red when it's small and gray when it's big, instead of the other way around, like that. Okay, I'm going to remove those, and I have a challenge where I want you to try adding some responsive styles to our project. Okay, so I want you to add some responsive styles that make this page a little more appropriate on a wider screen. And our default browser here is super narrow within Scrimba, so we'll use the XS breakpoint modifier to say that the screen has become a little bit wider. And what you could do is change the size property to be 90 pixels on habit item. So if we go down here to habit item, we have size 70 pixels. So use the @XS breakpoint modifier to change this to 90 for when the browser is wider. On habit group, you could change this gap from 10 pixels to 30 pixels when the @XS breakpoint modifier applies. Okay, so see if you can set up at least those two styles, and you could add any other styles you want to have for when the browser is wider. And I wrote a little reference here for the syntax of modifiers. Go ahead and give that a try, and then I'll show you how to do it. All right, so down here where we have size, I'm just going to follow that with @XS:90 pixels. And now I'm going to resize the browser, and when it gets a little wider, those become 90 pixel squares. Okay, and then for this gap, let's try using the other style where we write the modifier on the property name. So I'll do G@XS:30 pixels. Let's test that that works. Yeah, so the gap between those is getting bigger now. And I think it would be fun to animate these. So I'm going to add, Imba has a shorthand for the transition property, which is tween. And I'll say all properties, 200 milliseconds with ease. I'll just paste the same thing in down here on habit group. Cool, now we have a nice animation as we hit that breakpoint.